I'm Melia Carlson, 38, and I turned a failed cafe into a multi-brand food company, stocked in over 600 stores. For years, I showed up for my brother-in-law, loaned him money, helped him find work, supported him like he was my own family. But when he mocked my business in front of everyone at Thanksgiving dinner, like I was some joke who never should have tried, I made a decision that changed the course of my life. Ever had someone you trusted treat your effort like it was worthless? If that's ever happened to you, share your story in the comments, I promise. You're not the only one. Before I take you through what happened, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to rebuild after someone wrote you off, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about quiet strength, boundaries, and rising without asking for permission. Because what happened after that dinner wasn't what anyone expected. My name is Melia Carlson, and I never expected that the person who would eventually underestimate me the most wasn't a stranger or a competitor, but someone I once considered family. Before I tell you what happened when he walked into my office 2 years later and realized I was the owner of the company he had just joined, let me take you back to the beginning. I met Tom during my last year of college. He was calm, dependable, a little older than me, and already working full-time in IT. We clicked quickly. I loved how grounded he was. His family was warm, a little loud, but close in a way mine never had been. Sunday dinners at his parents' house were sacred, and holidays were big, chaotic events that made my childhood Thanksgivings look like quiet luncheons. His younger brother Ryan was the opposite of Tom in every way, charismatic, opinionated, and the kind of guy who always had a story to tell. He lit up every room he walked into. At first, I found him exhausting, but over time, I understood why people gravitated toward him. When Tom and I got married, Ryan was our best man. His speech was half jokes, half sincerity, and it ended with him raising a glass and saying, "Welcome to the family, Jules. Just remember, I'm still the favorite." Everyone laughed. He meant it in a playful way, and I took it that way too. Over the years, our lives became more intertwined than I expected. When Tom and I bought our first house, Ryan helped paint the nursery when we found out I was pregnant. He was the fun uncle to our son, Ben, always showing up with snacks and toys, playing video games with him for hours, and letting him get away with things Tom and I wouldn't. Ryan wasn't married, didn't have kids, and didn't seem to want that life. But he loved being part of ours. Professionally, things weren't as smooth for him. He bounced around from job to job, mostly in sales. When things were going well, he was the first to talk about his latest commission check or some big account he was about to land. But when he hit a rough patch, he got quiet. During the pandemic, he was laid off from a marketing firm. It wasn't the first time he'd been between jobs, but it was the first time he seemed genuinely scared. He called Tom one night after a few drinks and admitted he didn't know what to do next. Tom offered to lend him some money. I suggested something different. "Why don't we help him get some freelance work?" I said. "He's good with people. Maybe social media or client outreach gigs. I can ask around." At the time, I was trying to get my cafe off the ground. I had signed the lease 2 months before the first lockdown. The timing couldn't have been worse. Every week felt like a balancing act between safety protocols, staffing issues, and figuring out how to get customers in the door. We weren't profitable, not even close. But I believed in what I was building. It wasn't just about food. It was about creating something that was mine. I had always wanted to run my own business, and this was my shot. Ryan didn't say much about it. He followed me on Instagram, liked some posts, and once sent a message saying, "Looks good, Jules. Hope it takes off." That was about it. I didn't expect him to be a cheerleader, but part of me hoped for a little more. He'd talk about mutual friends who had started tech companies or apps and described them as real entrepreneurs. But when I mentioned what I was working on, figuring out how to offer delivery, building partnerships with local farms, he'd nod politely and then change the subject. Still, I chalked it up to personality differences. Not everyone gets excited about food sourcing. We ended up giving him 200, 1 month when he was short on rent. He promised to pay it back. He didn't. I didn't push. At the time, it felt more important to help than to keep score. Over the next year, I forwarded him freelance leads. I even connected him with one of my vendors who was looking for someone to manage outbound emails. He got a few gigs, here and there. Nothing consistent. Meanwhile, Tom and I were growing apart. Our marriage wasn't bad, but it was stagnant. He was working longer hours. I was at the cafe more than I was home. We rarely fought, but we also rarely talked about anything besides bills or schedules. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that we were both stretched thin, trying to build something, and that eventually things would level out. They didn't. By the time our son turned 6, I was sleeping in the guest room most nights. I don't think either of us knew how to fix it. We were tired. Tired of trying, tired of pretending everything was fine. We started discussing separation casually, like we were planning a move or switching insurance. No big blowout, just the slow erosion of connection. We decided to wait until after the holidays to tell our families. I think part of me wanted to avoid the awkward conversations with Ryan. He had a way of turning everything into a joke when he was uncomfortable, and I didn't want my marriage to be another one of his punchlines. Around that time, my cafe hit a breaking point. Supply chain delays, staff turnover, rent increases. I was exhausted. I sat in my office one night after close, staring at the numbers, realizing that staying open for another quarter would mean risking everything. I shut it down quietly, paid out what I owed, broke the lease early, and sold the equipment. I didn't post a big goodbye online. I just stepped away. I felt like a failure. I'd poured 2 years of my life into that place. It was supposed to be the start of something. Now, it was just a closed sign on a dark window. When I told the family at Thanksgiving, it was the first time I'd seen most of them since the shutdown. Everyone was there. Tom, Ryan, their parents, cousins. Ryan walked in late, already talking loudly about some podcast he was obsessed with, waving a bottle of wine. At dinner, someone asked how the cafe was doing. I said I'd closed it a few weeks ago. The room went quiet. Tom looked down at his plate, and then Ryan laughed. "Wow, you really gave it a shot, huh?" he said, cutting into his turkey. "Some people just aren't entrepreneurs." He smirked, like he was trying to be funny, but no one laughed. I felt the air leave the room. I looked around and realized no one was going to say anything. Not Tom, not his parents, not even a polite, "That was uncalled for." Just silence and the sound of forks on china. I excused myself before dessert, told them I had a migraine, drove home alone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I started drafting a proposal for something I'd been thinking about for months, a digital platform to connect small food producers with direct consumers. I already knew the pain points. I'd lived them. I knew what was missing in the market, and what I wished I'd had when running the cafe. I had contacts. I had experience. I had nothing left to lose. And most importantly, I had no intention of telling Ryan a damn thing about it. By the time my cafe had been open 6 months, I was already behind on my projections. Weekdays were slow. Weekend rushes were inconsistent. I was doing everything: managing inventory, running payroll, training staff, scrubbing the espresso machine after close. I was barely sleeping, constantly crunching numbers to figure out how to keep the doors open just a little longer. But I still believed I could turn it around. I just needed more time. Ryan stopped asking how it was going around that point. He used to at least feign interest, send a "hope the coffee's flowing" text or comment on a post. But that all faded. I noticed the change slowly. He started talking more about other people's ventures, friends launching apps, some guy he knew who was building an AI-enabled investing platform. Now that he said one night at dinner, is a real startup. Scalable, you know? He didn't say it directly, but I felt the comparison. I was baking muffins and steaming milk while his buddies were pitching investors and talking about IPOs. It was subtle at first. A tone. A pause before he changed the subject. Then it became more overt. At a birthday dinner for Tom's mom, I mentioned that I was applying for a small business loan to help cover some equipment upgrades. I was hopeful. I had done my homework, built a solid case, and my numbers, while not perfect, showed enough traction to justify the request. Ryan snorted into his glass of wine. Still pouring money into that thing? He said, not even looking at me. I blinked. Yeah. I mean, I'm investing in growth. He shrugged. I guess. Just seems like a lot of effort for what? 12 tables and a pastry case? If it hasn't taken off by now. Tom gave me a look, the kind that said, just ignore him, but said nothing out loud. His silence stung almost as much as Ryan's words. That was the pattern. Ryan would say something dismissive, and no one would push back. Not even Tom. Not because they agreed necessarily, but because no one wanted to deal with the fallout. Ryan had always been the loud one, the one who pushed boundaries just far enough to be uncomfortable but not enough to be called out. It was easier to let it slide. He started interrupting me more. At family gatherings, if I shared an update about the cafe, anything, even something as simple as, we're trying a new brunch menu, he'd jump in with a joke or pivot the conversation. Millia's still playing restaurant, he'd say once when I mentioned I was doing my own marketing. Next week she's launching a Michelin star. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile. I was used to being underestimated. I grew up one of 3 daughters in a household where practical careers were prized and anything creative was a nice hobby. Even when I was winning business plan competitions in college, my dad used to say, "Sounds fun, but make sure you've got a backup plan." But hearing it from Ryan, someone I had helped when he was unemployed, someone I had loaned money to, hit differently. I tried to talk to Tom about it once. Ryan's been a lot lately, I said one night after a birthday dinner. Tom sighed. You know how he is. That's not a real answer. He doesn't mean anything by it. He's just joking. It's not funny. Tom rubbed the bridge of his nose, like he was already tired of the conversation. I think you're taking it personally. I didn't respond, but I did take it personally, because it was. Around that time, Ryan started hanging out with a new crowd. Guys he met through a friend of a friend, finance adjacent, early crypto adopters, big talkers. I saw them once at a rooftop bar downtown when I went to meet a vendor. They were all wearing the same uniform, fitted button-downs, designer sneakers, watches that cost more than my rent. Ryan spotted me across the bar, waved, and walked over. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, glancing at my plain black flats and messenger bag like I didn't quite belong. I had a meeting, I said. Local produce distributor, trying to get better rates on seasonal items. He nodded vaguely. Still grinding it out, huh? Respect. It didn't sound like respect. One of his friends walked up behind him and asked if I was the cafe girl. Ryan laughed. Yeah, she's in the food game. Real brick and mortar stuff. I smiled politely and excused myself before I said something I'd regret. Later that night, I checked my phone and realized Ryan had unfollowed the cafe's Instagram. He hadn't liked a post in months, but I hadn't noticed. Now it felt deliberate. Petty, maybe, but deliberate. At Thanksgiving that year, I made the mistake of bringing samples, cranberry walnut scones, and mini pumpkin loaves. I thought it would be a nice gesture. My mother-in-law thanked me, but I saw Ryan roll his eyes as he took a bite. These are good, he said. You should sell these online. Maybe you'd actually make money. It was said lightly, like a joke, but I heard the jab. The weirdest part was, there was a time when Ryan would have hyped me up. When I first told the family I was opening a cafe, He asked to see the floor plan. He'd made jokes about free coffee for life, about how he'd be the official taste tester. I think he liked the idea of having someone in the family doing something interesting, something different. But once it became hard, once I wasn't raking in profit or getting press, he lost interest. Maybe he needed to believe he was the most successful person in the room. Or maybe my struggle made him uncomfortable because it reminded him of his own. Either way, he distanced himself, but not quietly. Always with a comment, always with a smirk. At Christmas, I overheard him talking to one of Tom's cousins about some new startup that had just closed a 4 million seed round. Real innovation, he said. Not just serving espresso to people who want to sit in a cozy corner. I was in the kitchen, scraping burnt cheese off the edge of the baking dish. I didn't say anything. I just kept scraping. What hurt more than anything was how invisible my effort had become. I was working 60-hour weeks, doing the kind of hard, unglamorous work no one saw. Inventory at midnight, social media posts at 6 a.m, supplier calls on my lunch break. And none of it counted. Not to Ryan. Probably not to Tom either. One night, I was closing up after a long shift. I was the last one there. I had just finished mopping the floors when I sat down with a spreadsheet and realized I was short for payroll again. Not by much, just a couple $100, but it might as well have been thousands. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred, then opened my phone and scrolled through my messages. There was one from Ryan, sent weeks ago, asking for a Netflix password. That was the last time he had messaged me directly. I didn't respond to it then. I didn't respond now. That was the night I started researching alternative revenue models. I wasn't sure what would come of it, but I knew one thing with certainty. If I was going to fail, it wouldn't be quietly. And it wouldn't be on someone else's terms. Ryan could have his rooftop drinks and shiny friends and passive-aggressive digs. I had work to do. Thanksgiving that year was at Tom's parents' house, same as it had been every year since we got married. It was always a production, 20 people, folding chairs, assigned dishes. I signed up for dessert, as usual. It was the one thing I still felt proud of. Even as the cafe was falling apart behind the scenes, I could still bake. I could still show up with something beautiful. I brought 3 kinds of pie, homemade whipped cream, and a dozen mini pumpkin loaves wrapped in twine, with handwritten tags that said, "Happy Thanksgiving," in my neatest lettering. It felt like something I could control, a small offering, a reminder that I was still trying. I walked in balancing 2 trays. Tom was already there, chatting with his cousin near the kitchen. He looked up when he saw me but didn't come help. His mum rushed over instead, fussing over the pies. "These look amazing, Melia," she said. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thanks," I said, trying to smile. It felt good to bake again. The kitchen was warm, crowded, full of the usual holiday chaos. People drinking wine, arguing over football, kids running between legs. I set everything down and slipped away to the dining room to catch my breath. I hadn't been around the whole family since we closed the cafe. It had been a quiet decision. No dramatic announcement. No post. I just stopped posting menus and shut the doors. Tom had told his parents. I assumed the rest had heard through the usual chain of siblings and group chats. No one said anything directly when I walked in. No questions. No condolences. Just business as usual. Ryan showed up late, of course. Half an hour after dinner was supposed to start. He was wearing a blazer over a hoodie, holding a bottle of wine and laughing at something on his phone. He greeted everyone loudly, went around hugging people like he was the main event. When he saw me, he gave me a mock salute. "Hey, Jules. Still making those famous muffins?" I gave him a polite nod and went back to setting the dessert table. Dinner started on time. Once Ryan had made his entrance, and the turkey had been carved, the conversation skipped around, never landing for too long. Updates on kids, jobs, vacations. No one asked me what I was up to. I didn't offer it. At some point during the meal, someone complimented the pie. Ryan took a bite of the pecan and raised his eyebrows theatrically. "Okay," he said. "This is amazing. Like, restaurant quality." "Thanks," I said, surprised. "It's my grandmother's recipe." "You know what your real talent is," he said, still chewing. "Baking. You should just do that instead of trying to be an entrepreneur." The table went quiet for a second, just long enough for everyone to register it. Then someone chuckled. Then a few more people. Ryan smirked like he'd just made the most obvious observation in the world. Even Tom looked down at his plate. He didn't say anything. I tried to let it slide. "I was an entrepreneur," I said lightly. "Running a business involves more than just baking." Ryan shrugged. "Sure, but not everyone's cut out for business. That's not an insult. It's reality." He said it casually, like he was stating the weather. No venom, just certainty. I stared at him across the table. "What does that mean exactly?" He grinned. "I just mean, some people are better off doing the work, not running the show. And that's okay." I waited for someone, anyone, to say something, to push back, to change the subject, to defend me. No one did. Tom cleared his throat like he was going to jump in, but all he said was, "The turkey's great, Mom." I excused myself. I walked outside into the cold, empty driveway. The street was quiet. I stood there for a long time, watching my breath turn to fog. No one came after me. Not Tom, not his mum. Not even out of politeness. I left before dessert. When I got home, I peeled off the tag from one of the pumpkin loaves I had brought and threw it in the trash. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter where the cafe's to-go bags used to sit, and thought about how little space there was between mockery and silence, between a smirk and a shrug. Ryan's words weren't the first time someone had dismissed my work, but they were the clearest and the cruelest. Because they weren't about what I had built. They were about the fact that I had failed. And in his mind, he was just confirming something he'd believed all along. That I wasn't meant for this. That I didn't belong at the table. And the worst part? I think he thought he was doing me a favor, telling me the truth, giving me permission to stop trying. But he didn't understand me at all. Because what he saw as failure, I saw as data. What he saw as the end, I saw as step one. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the document I'd started weeks earlier. My concept pitch for the platform I was planning. It was rough, half-formed, a mess of notes and hyperlinks and spreadsheets. I started cleaning it up, tightening the proposal, outlining market gaps, building a pricing model. I worked until 3 a.m, and by the time I shut my laptop, I had a new working title. Quiet Growth. How to build what no one believes in. It wasn't just a project anymore. It was a promise. I didn't go home right after I left the Thanksgiving dinner. I sat in the car, with the engine off, the cold creeping into my fingers through the steering wheel. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon still clung to my coat. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring through the windshield at the quiet street, watching the light flicker behind the curtains of Tom's parents' house, and trying to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't just what Ryan said. It was the way no one challenged him. The way the conversation moved on like I hadn't just been insulted at a family dinner by someone who used to borrow money from me. I thought about the night I floated him rent. It had been March of 2020. He'd been let go from his job, and he called Tom late, said he didn't want to ask but didn't know what else to do. Tom looked at me across the kitchen table, uncertain. "We have it," I said, already opening the banking app on my phone. I sent the transfer that night. Ryan texted a few hours later. "Thanks, Jules. I owe you one." That was the last time he ever brought it up. I thought about the freelance leads I sent him, the calls I took during my lunch breaks to help him rewrite his resume. I had even offered to refer him to a few people in my vendor network when he said he was trying to pivot into consulting. I did all of it without expecting anything in return, but I never thought he'd look at me one day and call me a failure to my face. I never thought he'd say it like he was doing me a favor, like confirming his low expectations of me was some kind of kindness. I started the car and drove home slowly. The roads were nearly empty. Half the neighborhood still had their porch lights on. I pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for another minute before going inside. The house was quiet. Ben was staying overnight with my sister and her kids, and Tom wasn't home yet. I knew he would stay behind to help clean up, maybe have one more drink with his cousins. I didn't expect an apology, but I thought he'd cool. He didn't. I made a cup of tea, let it go cold on the counter, then sat down on the living room floor with my laptop and opened the same proposal I'd been building in pieces over the last month. It was still called Platform Docs, and it still looked more like a brainstorm than a business plan. But it was something. A draft. A beginning. The idea came from what I saw firsthand in the food industry, how hard it was for small producers to survive. The cafe had connected me to dozens of independent farms and artisanal makers, and I saw their struggles up close. High overhead, inefficient distribution, outdated marketing. I kept thinking, if someone could centralize access to local food without making it feel corporate or generic, maybe more of these businesses would last. Maybe mine would have too. I wasn't sure yet what the product would look like, but I knew the pain points. I had lived them. And that night, sitting cross-legged on the carpet in my jeans and sweater with the lights off except for the glow of the screen, I decided I was done trying to explain myself. I wouldn't defend my choices anymore. I wouldn't try to correct the record at the next family dinner, or wait for someone to finally say, "Hey, that wasn't fair what he said to you." I was done trying to be understood by people who weren't listening. When Tom got home, I was still at the computer. He walked in quietly, set his keys down on the counter, and grabbed a water from the fridge. I didn't look up. I waited. "You left kind of suddenly," he said finally. "Yeah," I said. There was a pause. "Ryan was out of line," he added, but his voice didn't have much weight to it, like he was saying it because he knew he should. I looked at him, and you didn't say anything. I didn't want to make it worse. I closed the laptop slowly. "He humiliated me in front of your entire family." Tom sighed. "Ryan's always been like that. He pushes buttons. He thinks he's being funny." It wasn't funny. I know. He made a joke about me not being built for business, about the cafe, in front of everyone, and no one said a word. "I'm sorry," he said, but it sounded tired. Automatic. "I loaned him money, Tom, when we were barely covering our own bills. I helped him get work. I vouched for him." Tom sat down on the edge of the couch. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to be as upset as I am," I said, the words coming out before I had time to check the emotion in my voice. "I want you to care that your brother thinks I'm a joke. He doesn't think that. He does. He said it. Out loud. And you let him." He looked at the floor. "You're right. I should have said something." It was quiet for a long time after that. Then he got up, mumbled that he was going to bed, and left me sitting there. I opened my laptop again, but the momentum was gone. That weekend, I started organizing everything I had related to the platform idea, notes, financial projections, contacts, early design mock-ups. I made a list of everything I didn't know how to do yet: UI, UX, back-end development, legal structure. Then I made another list of people I could ask for help. I didn't talk to Tom about it. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I was done trying to convince him I was serious. If he didn't already know, he never would. By Monday, I had a rough outline and a few names of people to reach out to. I booked a free consultation with a local tech incubator. I drafted an intro email to a small investor group I'd once met at a conference. I scheduled a meeting with a friend who had experience with MVPs. Every step felt small, but each one pulled me further away from the version of myself I'd been trying to prove to Ryan, or to Tom, or to anyone really. I started waking up earlier again. Not because I had a shift or a supplier call, but because my brain was wired for momentum. For the first time in months, I had it again. The funny thing was, I didn't feel angry. Not in the way people expect. I didn't want revenge. I didn't fantasize about confronting Ryan at some future dinner with a slideshow of my wins. I just wanted distance. I wanted to build something so quietly successful, it would speak for itself. So clearly valuable that no one would be able to deny it, even if they never said a word out loud. I didn't need them to be proud of me. I just needed to stop needing them. So that's what I did. One page, one meeting, one email at a time. I stopped asking for understanding. I started building. I gave myself until the end of December to decide what to do. Either I'd let the dream go entirely, or I'd rebuild it in a way that made sense for where I was. The cafe was done. That part was clear. Even if I'd had the money to stay afloat, I didn't have the will. Running a storefront meant pouring everything into an experience most people didn't think twice about. Clean tables, fresh muffins, warm lighting. It was exhausting. And more than that, it was invisible. No one saw the prep, the payroll panic, the nights I drove across town because a supplier dropped the wrong order. I gave notice to the landlord and negotiated out of the lease with minimal penalties. The kitchen equipment I didn't sell, I put in storage. I kept the best parts, my baking tools, my recipe notes, the content folders from our social media account, and walked away from everything else. No public goodbye, no heartfelt caption, just quiet closure. While Tom and I sorted out the logistics of separating, I started working from home, turning my dining room into a makeshift test kitchen. I wasn't sure what the business would be yet, but I had a direction. My best sellers had always been the pantry items, the spiced nuts, the flavored salts, the jarred sauces. I knew what moved. More importantly, I knew what scaled. I started by setting up a simple Shopify site. I used the name I'd been sitting on since the early cafe days, June Pantry. It felt personal and neutral. I designed the logo myself. I couldn't afford a branding agency, so I hired a freelance designer for 20 hours and used the rest of my budget on packaging samples. I figured out my margins, priced aggressively, and launched with 5 products, 2 baking mixes, 2 spice blends, and 1 seasonal jam. The first 2 months were slow. I sold to friends, old customers, a few people who still followed the cafe's account. I sent out samples to local food bloggers. One of them posted an Instagram reel that got over 100,000 views. Orders tripled overnight. That was my first lesson. Visibility matters more than effort. After that, I built a calendar of partnerships and giveaways. If I didn't have reach, I'd borrow it. I took a free digital marketing course online and joined a Slack group for women in e-commerce. Every evening after Ben went to bed, I stayed up reading case studies about product launches, fulfillment hacks, customer retention strategies. I watched YouTube tutorials while folding laundry. Bit by bit, I learned. I made mistakes. I ran out of jars one week and had to refund 20 orders. My first wholesale pitch bombed. But I kept going. I treated it like a job, not a side hustle. I scheduled content 2 weeks in advance. I tracked conversion rates. I emailed customers personally when something went wrong. Within 6 months, I was profitable. Not wildly, but enough to pay myself a small salary and reinvest. I brought on a fractional marketing lead and a part-time operations assistant. We used a shared Trello board. Everything was remote, scrappy, but it worked. Tom and I finalized our separation in the spring. It was amicable. We didn't fight over assets or custody. He moved into a condo across town and saw Ben every other weekend. I think he was relieved more than anything. The silence between us had been louder than any argument. When I told him about June Pantry, he nodded politely. That's good, he said. I'm glad you're keeping busy. Keeping busy, I didn't correct him. By the 1-year mark, we'd grown enough to lease a small commercial kitchen. I hired 2 production assistants. We expanded into 15 SKUs. A regional grocery buyer reached out after seeing our Instagram ads and placed a test order for 5 locations. That turned into 20, then 75. We got a write-up in a lifestyle blog, then a feature in a niche food magazine. I barely had time to process any of it. I was too busy trying to keep up. Ryan messaged me once during that period. It was a short note. Hey, heard you're doing something with packaged foods. I'm trying to break into distribution for a startup I'm advising. Mind sharing your contact at Glenwood Grocery? I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I was tempted to reply, but because of how casually he asked. Like we were colleagues. Like he hadn't stood across a Thanksgiving table and told me I wasn't cut out for this. I didn't respond. I didn't even leave it on read. I archived the message and moved on. A few months later, we were both at a cousin's wedding. It was one of those rustic vineyard ceremonies with mismatched chairs and strings of lights over the dance floor. Ryan was there with a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, stylish, very polished. I said a polite hello, then went back to my table. Later, while we were waiting for the bar, he leaned in and said, "So I heard June Pantry is doing well. That's awesome. You really got lucky with that Instagram thing, huh?" I nodded. Yeah, lucky. He smiled like we were in on some inside joke. I didn't correct him. There was no point. He didn't ask what I was actually doing. He didn't ask about the grocery partnerships, the expansion, the fact that I had quietly raised a small round of seed funding to support the next phase. He assumed the same thing he always had, that whatever I achieved must have happened by accident, a fluke, a win that somehow bypassed the rules he believed in. I let him believe it. Letting people underestimate you can be useful. It keeps them from looking too closely. It gives you room to build. By the end of that year, we'd landed contracts with 2 national retailers and were in talks with a third. I brought on a head of sales and moved fulfillment to a third-party warehouse. I gave myself my first real paycheck. Bought new furniture, took Ben on a weekend trip to the coast, and didn't have to calculate how many days I could afford to be offline. It felt quiet. Not glamorous, but solid. I didn't announce any of it to the family. I didn't send links or holiday promo codes. I didn't brag at dinner or correct anyone when they assumed I was still dabbling in food. I just kept working. Because the people who once dismissed you rarely know what they're looking at until your name shows up on a building. And that was coming. The thing about Ryan was, he was always moving. Not forward necessarily, just in motion. 1 year, he was all in on real estate investing. Then it was day trading. Then crypto. Each time he'd show up at family gatherings with a new pitch, a new strategy, a new book he'd skimmed that had completely changed how he saw money. He always talked like he was just one connection away from breaking out. And maybe he believed it. I watched it all happen from a distance. I didn't comment on his posts or ask how things were going. I had learned my lesson. People like Ryan didn't want accountability. They wanted an audience. He launched a podcast during the tail end of the NFT boom, something about disruptive thinking and mindset mastery. I listened to one episode out of curiosity. It was mostly him monologuing about how traditional business models are dead and how the real winners build networks, not products. I closed the tab before it finished loading the next episode. Then came the consulting phase. He branded himself as a startup advisor, posted screenshots of Zoom calls with blurry captions about growth and scale, occasionally hinted at stealth projects in development. He liked being seen as someone who knew things. The details were always vague. Meanwhile, June Pantry kept growing. The grocery accounts expanded. We added new regions. Our SKUs doubled, then tripled. I launched a line of ready-to-bake frozen doughs and partnered with a fulfillment center near Denver to handle the West Coast orders. The team grew to 12, half full-time, the rest freelance. I started using a holding company for expansion. That wasn't a strategic decision at first, it was just cleaner for taxes. But as we moved into acquisition mode, it gave me leverage. Options. We bought our first small brand that year, a family-owned jam company based in Vermont that had built a loyal following but couldn't manage scale. I brought them in under the holding company, kept the original team, and focused on infrastructure. 3 months later, sales doubled. The second acquisition was a food tech startup based in Austin. Niche, underfunded, but promising. They had built software to manage wholesale supply chains for boutique grocery items. The back end was messy, but the IP had potential, and I liked the founder. She was a former chef who'd burned out trying to do it all and wanted out. We struck a quiet deal. I took a majority stake and left most of the public-facing leadership intact. We didn't announce it. No press. Just a quiet legal filing and a new back-end email address. 6 months later, Ryan posted a photo of his laptop on LinkedIn. The caption read, "Excited to be starting fresh with a new team at one of the fastest-growing food tech platforms in the country. Time to build." I recognized the logo immediately. He'd taken a job at the company I had just acquired. He had no idea I was behind it. There was no reason he would. The parent company wasn't public, and I hadn't put my name on any of the external communications. For everyone inside, it was just a quiet shift in leadership and a better budget. I stared at the post for a long time. Then I scheduled a visit. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Not the regional director, not the ops team. Just booked a flight, checked into a hotel near the Austin office, and sent a calendar invite to the local GM for a routine strategy session. I wasn't going for drama. I wasn't even angry. I just wanted to see it happen. In person. I walked into the office 2 days later, wearing a navy blazer and jeans, holding a black notebook and a small coffee I'd picked up from a cart downstairs. The office was smaller than I expected. Clean, open plan, with whiteboards filled with half-erased scribbles, and someone's playlist echoing faintly from a corner speaker. Ryan was standing near the reception desk, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He didn't see me right away. I signed in, waited a beat, then walked toward the meeting room they'd reserved for me. I didn't break stride when I passed him. When he looked up and saw me, there was a half-second where his face froze. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. The person next to him kept talking, oblivious. I didn't stop. I just nodded once, politely, and kept walking. I heard him say, quietly, "Is that?" But the rest was lost. Inside the meeting room, I sat with the GM and a few team leads. We reviewed current partnerships, marketing gaps, integration plans for the new software. I took notes, asked questions, nodded along. I didn't bring up Ryan. Neither did they. It wasn't until lunch that he showed up. He knocked lightly on the glass door, waited for me to look up. "Hey," he said, almost casual. "Didn't realize you were involved here." I smiled. "I'm one of the managing partners." He blinked. "Since when?" "About 6 months." He nodded slowly, like he was still trying to process it. "That's cool. I didn't see any announcements." We kept it quiet, easier for transitions. "Right, yeah." He hesitated. "Well, welcome to Austin, I guess." "Thanks," I said. "It's a good team." He stood there for a second longer, then backed out of the room. I watched him walk away. Later that week, one of the department heads forwarded me a message Ryan had sent internally. It was filled with vague suggestions about streamlining partnerships and positioning the company more aggressively in the influencer space. It read like someone trying very hard to sound useful. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Not really. But he wasn't doing much of value either. I didn't fire him. I didn't need to. He wasn't high enough to matter. He wasn't damaging anything. And I didn't want the story to end with a scene. That wasn't what this had ever been about. It wasn't about taking something from him. It was about no longer needing his approval. And now he worked for me. He reported to a team that reported to a team that reported to someone I had hired. He probably didn't know the extent of it. I doubted he'd looked at the ownership documents or the cap table. He was just showing up, clocking in, pitching half-baked ideas, trying to feel relevant. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it's quiet. This time, it was printed on the bottom corner of every internal report. Managed by Willow North Holdings. My name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. He sent the email the morning after I visited the Austin office. It was short, polite, almost cautious. Hi Melia, great to see you yesterday, even if briefly. Would love to grab coffee sometime while you're in town and catch up properly. Let me know if your schedule allows. Hope all's well. I read it twice before closing the tab. There was nothing overtly wrong with it. On paper, it was exactly what someone might say if they were being professional, courteous, trying to smooth over whatever awkwardness hung in the air from an unexpected reunion. But I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Just clarity. He didn't know the years between us. He didn't know that his performance wasn't what stuck with me, that it was his laughter, his smirks, the way he cut me off mid-sentence, the way no one else said anything when he did. And I had no desire to play catch-up. He followed up 2 days later with a LinkedIn message. Still in Austin? If not, no worries. Just wanted to say congrats again on everything. Looks like June pantries everywhere now. Inspiring stuff. I didn't reply to that one either. HR flagged the first performance issue a month later. It was small, something about missed follow-ups and vague communication with a distribution lead. I read the report as part of my weekly review. Normally I wouldn't have paid it any attention, but I recognized the initials and paused. I asked the regional manager how things were going. Mixed, she said. He talks a good game, but the execution isn't there. He kind of floats between tasks. I didn't say anything, just noted it, moved on. By the end of the quarter, he was reassigned to a different team, non-client facing, less visibility, more process work. The kind of role that's technically important but rarely urgent. I signed off on the reorg without comment. He didn't email again, and that was fine with me. We saw each other again 2 months later at Tom's father's retirement party. It was a backyard event, catered, low-key, with folding chairs and cousins milling around. I came alone. Tom and I were cordial these days, co-parents more than anything else. Ben stayed close to the bounce house with his cousins, while I helped Tom's mom carry out dessert trays. Ryan arrived late, as always. He brought a bottle of wine and greeted people like he hadn't seen them in years. He saw me from across the yard and nodded once. I nodded back. We didn't speak. Later, while I was helping stack empty plates, I overheard him talking to one of the aunts. Works fine. The new company's solid. Still getting my bearings. Startups, you know. Fast moving. I didn't say a word. Just kept stacking. People assume revenge looks like confrontation. A takedown. A mic drop. But more often, it looks like indifference. It looks like walking past the person who once mocked you without so much as a pause. It looks like letting them talk while you go back to building. I never told anyone in the family what happened. I never shared the reports. Never bragged about the acquisition. Never reminded Ryan about the rent I covered, or the calls I took, or the way he used to laugh when I said the cafe would grow. I didn't need to. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to feel the weight shift. At Christmas that year, we ended up at the same table. It was a long, crowded dinner with too much food and not enough chairs. We passed dishes, made small talk about weather and traffic. He asked how Ben was doing in school. I said he was doing great, growing fast. He nodded. I asked about his commute. He said it wasn't bad. We didn't talk about work, or the past, or anything that might turn sharp, and that was enough. Civility, distance, boundaries. It's not the kind of resolution that fits neatly into a story, but it's the one that makes peace livable. I still get reports from his department every other week. His name shows up occasionally, attached to a task, a missed deadline, a follow-up. I read them without emotion. Just part of the file. Just another line item in a business I built from the ground up. He'll probably never know how close he came to being cut. Not because I wanted revenge, but because performance is performance. But I never pushed for it. Never made a call. Never sent a note to HR. I didn't need to. He's his own consequence. I just made sure the system was strong enough to let that truth play out. When people ask me now what I do, I just say I run a food company. I don't tell them how it started. I don't mention the cafe, or the Thanksgiving dinner, or the night I sat in my car trying to breathe through humiliation. That story belongs to me. And I don't owe anyone the ending. Last week, I flew to Minneapolis for a retail summit. One of the big chains we work with was announcing a new initiative to highlight women-owned brands, and I'd been invited to speak on a panel. I kept my remarks short, clear, nothing dramatic, just some honest thoughts on sustainable growth and building trust with customers. I said what I always say: stay consistent, own your numbers, don't try to be the loudest in the room. When it was over, 2 founders came up to introduce themselves. They told me they'd followed June Pantry from the early days. One of them asked how I stayed grounded. I just smiled and said, a lot of trial and error. What I didn't say, what I never say in public, is that most of what I built came out of silence, out of being underestimated, out of the quiet space people leave when they decide your story is over. Today, I own 3 brands, each one acquired quietly. Each one led by women with deep knowledge and no interest in attention. We're in over 600 stores across the country. Not all the chains are big, but they're steady, loyal. We've built something people come back to, something that lasts. My name is on the founding documents, on the investor decks, on the wall of every headquarters we operate. But I don't use it like a flag. I don't walk in and expect recognition. I found that leadership works better when it's steady, not loud. I make decisions. I write checks. I review strategy. But I don't micromanage, and I don't chase credit. Some people don't get that. Ryan never did. He still works at the Austin Company, still shows up at 9, leaves around 5:30. He hasn't been promoted, hasn't been fired. He's just there, one employee among many. His name shows up in Slack channels and on internal spreadsheets. His email sometimes lands in my inbox when someone forgets to remove me from a thread. I saw him at the office a few months ago. I'd flown in for a quarterly review, met with the leadership team, and stayed behind after the meeting to tour the space. A new product display had just been installed in the front lobby, a photo wall with the founders of every brand under our umbrella. They had designed it to look like a gallery. Each frame showed the name, launch date, and a short mission statement. My face was there, mid-left row, professional headshot, navy shirt, neutral background. Underneath, it read, Melia Ames, founder, June Pantry, building better food systems with clarity, trust, and care. I was walking back from the elevator when I saw him standing in front of it. He didn't notice me right away. He had his hands in his pockets and was leaning slightly forward, like he was trying to reconcile something. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't impressed. He looked puzzled, like the math didn't add up. I kept walking. No pause. No comment. He turned his head slightly when I passed but didn't speak. And I didn't stop. Because what was there to say? There's no speech that would make it make sense to him. No version of my journey that he could see as legitimate. His framework didn't allow for quiet success, for building something real without fanfare. In his world, power was loud, fast, bragged about. Mine wasn't. Mine came from early mornings, hard choices, and every moment I kept going after someone told me I shouldn't. And I don't need to explain that to him, or to anyone. At family events now, we're civil. We make small talk when we have to. I ask about his new condo. He asks how Ben's doing in school. We keep it surface level, safe. There's no edge to it anymore. No warmth either. Tom and I are in a good rhythm. We co-parent well. He's dating someone now, someone kind, from what I can tell. We exchange schedules, photos, updates about school. We're not friends exactly, but we respect each other, and that's enough. Ben is 10 now. He knows I run a company, but I don't think he fully understands the scale of it yet. To him, I make cookies for a living, which isn't wrong. The other day, he came home from a friend's house with a snack I recognized, a granola bar from one of the brands we'd acquired last year. He held it up and said, "Mom, this has your name on the back." I nodded. Kind of. Did you make this? I helped build the company that makes it. He thought about that for a second. Then he smiled. Cool. And that was it. No fanfare, no follow-up. Just cool. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving dinner, the pie, the laughter, the silence afterward. I think about the way I left early, hands shaking, face burning. I remember sitting in the car wondering if I was wrong. If maybe I wasn't cut out for business. If I was just playing at something too big for me. I was never playing. I was building. And every step of that journey mattered. Even the ones no one saw. Especially those. Because the legacy isn't in the product or the press. It's not in the shelves or the stores or even the revenue. It's in the shift. The quiet but irreversible shift between who I was that night and who I became after. Ryan still walks past the founder wall. Every day. He sees my name, my face, the quote, and I know he still doesn't understand how I got here. That's fine. He doesn't need to. Some stories aren't told through confrontation. They're told in what happens next. In the building. The staying. The becoming. I don't need a final word. I already had the last move. Thanks for listening to my story. Have you ever had to watch someone who doubted you eat their words quietly, or worked with someone who once humiliated you, not knowing you are now in charge? Drop your experience in the comments. I read every one. And if you've ever had to rebuild in silence while others underestimated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about turning the tables without ever raising your voice. You never owe them an explanation. Just results.